My sister is an unfit mother, and Miles deserves a family who can actually afford to raise him. That's what my younger brother said. Not behind my back, not in a whispered phone call. He said it in a courtroom corridor, loud enough for the bailiff to turn his head, loud enough for the elderly couple on the bench near the water fountain to stop mid-conversation and stare. He said it while standing in a tailored navy suit I'd paid for 3 Christmases ago, his hair freshly cut, his shoes polished, looking like the kind of man who had things figured out. I didn't flinch. I didn't look at him. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder, placed my hand on the back of my son's head, and kept walking toward the courtroom door. That was the morning my brother tried to take my child. If you've ever had a family member treat you like you didn't matter, hit that like button and subscribe. Let me take you back, because this didn't start in a courthouse. It started 9 years ago when I was 25 years old and already learning that love in my family came with an invoice. My name is Colleen Archer. I'm 34. I teach 4th grade at a public elementary school in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I make $54,500 a year before taxes. I've been doing this for 11 years. I know every reading level benchmark, every parent-teacher conference trick, every way to stretch a classroom budget when the district cuts funding again. I'm good at my job. I love my job. I'm also a widow. My husband, Mark Miller, died in a car accident 5 years ago. Miles was 3. I remember the hospital hallway. I remember the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like trapped insects. I remember a nurse handing me a cup of water I never drank. What I don't remember is crying. Not that night. I must have, but what I remember most is the silence. The heavy, permanent silence of knowing the person who made your house feel like a home was never walking through the door again. Mark had life insurance, good life insurance, because Mark was careful. He was a planner. That money didn't go to vacations or a bigger house. I sat down with a financial advisor named Gerald Wilson 3 weeks after the funeral, while Miles napped in his car seat beside my chair, and I put every dollar of it into managed index funds and dividend-yielding accounts. I didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not my brother, not a single soul outside that office. Those investments grew quietly, the way smart money does when you leave it alone. By the time everything that happened in this story happened, I was earning $82,000 a year in dividends alone. Combined with my teaching salary, that put me at $136,500 annually. My house, a modest 3-bedroom on a tree-lined street 4 blocks from Miles' school, was paid off entirely, worth $315,000. Nobody in my family knew any of this. To them, I was just Colleen, the teacher, the one with the sensible shoes and the boring job and the sad little life. And then there was Bryce. My brother Bryce is 27 years old, 7 years younger than me, and for as long as I can remember, Bryce was the sun, and the rest of us were just orbiting. When Bryce was 14, he told our parents he wanted to be an entrepreneur. My mother, Loretta, clapped her hands together like he'd announced he was curing cancer. My father, Dennis, nodded slowly and said, "That's my boy." When I was 14, I told my parents I wanted to be a teacher. My mother said, "Well, someone has to do it." My father said nothing. That was the template. Everything after was just a variation on the same song. Bryce dropped out of college 9 years ago. He was 19. He'd lasted 3 semesters. The tuition my parents had scraped together, the tuition they never offered me, went straight into the drain. But nobody called it a failure. Loretta called it a pivot. Dennis called it finding his own path. 2 weeks after Bryce dropped out, my phone rang at 11:30 at night. He needed $400 for groceries. He said the word groceries the way a child says please when they already know the answer is yes. I sent it. I didn't ask questions. He was my little brother. That was the first transfer. It was not the last. Over the next 9 years, I gave Bryce Archer exactly $63,450. I know that number because I kept every receipt, every bank confirmation, every text message. Not because I plan to use them. Because I'm a teacher, I grade papers, I track attendance, I document. It's what I do. The $12,000 came first. Bryce had an idea for a food truck, gourmet grilled cheese. He said it with such conviction that for a moment, even I believed it might work. He needed startup capital. He'd pay me back within 6 months, he said. The food truck lasted 11 weeks. He sold it for parts and never mentioned the $12,000 again. Then came the car. His transmission blew on the highway. That was $2,800. Then tires. 3 separate sets over 4 years because Bryce drove the way he lived, fast and reckless, and always someone else's problem when things wore out. $1,450 total, $4,250 for the car alone, then the rent. 2 years ago, Bryce called me and said he needed to focus on his brand. He'd found a luxury apartment downtown, exposed brick, rooftop access, a gym in the basement, $2,200 a month. He asked me to cover it temporarily. Temporarily turned into 18 months. That was $39,600. $39,600 so my 25-year-old brother could post Instagram photos from a rooftop pool while I packed Miles's lunch for school at 5:30 in the morning. And the rest? The $7,600 and what I came to think of as miscellaneous bailouts, that covered credit card minimums he'd missed, a utility shutoff he swore would never happen again, a cell phone bill he couldn't pay because he'd upgraded to the newest model. Every time I told myself it was just family. Every time I swallowed the sting and opened the banking app and typed in the amount and pressed send. Every time Bryce said thank you in the exact same tone a man uses when a vending machine drops his soda. Functional, expected, forgettable. My mother knew about most of it. Loretta didn't just know, she facilitated. When Bryce needed something, it was Loretta who called first, softening the ground. Your brother's going through a rough patch, Colleen. He just needs a little help getting on his feet, Colleen. You know how hard it is for young men these days. Colleen. She said my name like punctuation, like a period at the end of a sentence that was already decided. My father, Dennis, said nothing. Dennis never said anything. He sat in his recliner with the television on and his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and he stared at whatever was in front of him, which was never the problem and never his daughter. His silence wasn't cruel the way my mother's laughter was. It was worse. It was permission. And through all of it, through every late-night phone call and every wire transfer and every Sunday dinner where Bryce showed up in new sneakers while I wore the same cardigan I'd owned for 6 years, I kept quiet. I kept giving. I kept telling myself that this was what family did, that I was the big sister, that I had more than enough. Then 3 months ago, Bryce called me at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Miles was already in bed. I was grading spelling tests at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. He needed me to co-sign a $25,000 business loan. He was starting a lifestyle coaching company. He said it like it was a real thing, like the words lifestyle coaching weren't just two nouns held together by ambition, and absolutely nothing else. I said no. I didn't explain. I didn't apologize. I didn't offer an alternative. I just said no. The line went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that means someone is thinking. The kind that means someone is recalculating who you are. You're serious, he said. I am. After everything this family has done for you, I stayed silent. There was nothing to add. He hung up. No goodbye, no follow-up. Just the dead air of a man who had been told no for the first time in 27 years. 3 weeks passed. Then the letter arrived. It came in a plain white envelope with a return address from a law office I didn't recognize. I opened it, standing at the kitchen counter while Miles ate cereal at the table behind me. The first line hit like a fist to the sternum. Emergency petition for temporary custody of minor child, Miles Archer. My hands didn't shake. I read it again, then a third time, each word landing precisely where it was designed to land. The petition was filed by Bryce Archer. It claimed that I, Colleen Archer, was financially unable to provide adequate care for my son. It cited my teaching salary, $54,500, as evidence of economic instability. It stated that Miles would be better served in a household with broader family support and financial resources. It requested an emergency hearing within 45 days. I turned the page. There was an attached affidavit, 2 signatures at the bottom, Dennis Archer, Loretta Archer. My parents had signed it. My mother and father, who had watched me raise Miles alone for 5 years, who had sat at my kitchen table eating meals I cooked with groceries I bought in a house I owned outright, had put their names on a document that called me unfit. I set the letter down on the counter. I placed both hands flat on the granite. I stood there for a long time, looking out the window at the backyard where Miles's bicycle leaned against the fence. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply stood there and let the silence fill every corner of the room. Mom? Miles's voice came from behind me, small, careful. Is everything okay? I turned around. I smiled. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Finish your cereal." He looked at me the way only an 8-year-old who has already lost one parent can look at you, like he's checking to see if the world is about to break again. I waited until he left for school that morning. I watched the bus pull away from the curb. I stood at the front door until the taillights disappeared around the corner. Then I walked back to the kitchen, sat down in the exact same chair, and picked up the letter again. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not loud, not dramatic, just a clean, quiet break. Like a wire pulled too tight for too many years finally letting go. What I didn't know yet, what I wouldn't learn until 2 weeks later, was what they'd already done to Miles. My parents had been visiting him at school during their approved grandparent lunch hour. They'd sat across from him in the cafeteria and told him that his mother was struggling, that she might not be able to take care of him much longer, that Uncle Bryce had a fun house where Miles could live with a pool and a big TV and his own room. They told my 8-year-old son that he might have to leave his home. Miles didn't tell me right away. He held it inside the way I taught him to hold things, quiet, careful, trying not to be a burden. But the signs were there. His grades, straight A's since first grade, dipped for the first time. His teacher sent a note home saying he seemed distracted, withdrawn. And then one night, at 2:14 a.m., I heard the sound of his bedroom door opening. He was standing in the hallway in his pajamas, the ones with the little rockets on them, and his sheets were wet. He hadn't wet the bed since he was 4. He looked up at me with those wide brown eyes, and his voice cracked right down the middle. "Mom, am I going to have to live with Uncle Bryce?" I knelt down in front of him. I pulled him close. I felt his small hands grip the back of my shirt so hard the fabric twisted white under his knuckles. "No," I said. My voice was steady. "Not now, not ever." I held him until he fell back asleep in my bed. I pulled the covers up to his chin. I watched him breathe for a long time, the way his chest rose and fell, the way his mouth went slack, the way only a sleeping child's can. Then I got up. I walked to the kitchen. I sat down at the table in the dark, the streetlight cutting through the blinds, my phone glowing on the counter, and I called Arthur Davis. Arthur Davis answered on the second ring. It was 3:12 in the morning, and his voice was clear. No gravel, no hesitation, like a man who had been waiting for this exact call from someone for a very long time. Arthur was 55 years old. He'd been practicing family law in Grand Rapids for 26 years. I'd found him through a recommendation from Sarah Thompson, Miles' school principal, 3 days after the letter arrived. Sarah had pulled me aside after drop-off, her hand on my elbow, her voice low and even. "I've seen what's happening with Miles. I've documented everything from our end, and I know someone you need to call." Arthur charged $275 an hour. He was worth every cent. That night, sitting in the dark at my kitchen table with the streetlight cutting lines through the blinds, I told him everything. Not the short version, the entire story. 9 years of transfers. The $63,450. Every receipt I'd saved. Every bank confirmation, every text thread, every voicemail I'd never deleted because deleting things wasn't something I did. The voicemails. That's where Arthur stopped me. "How many?" he asked. 14, I said. At least 14 where he's explicitly asking for money, crying, begging, saying I'm the only one who can help. Arthur was quiet for 3 seconds, then he said, "Don't delete a single thing. Forward all of it to my office email tonight. Every voicemail, every bank statement, every text. I want 9 years of documentation on my desk by morning." I didn't sleep after that call. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and my phone plugged in, and I began the process of exporting every saved voicemail, every screenshot, every transaction record from 9 years of being Bryce Archer's personal savings account. I organized them by date. I created folders. I labeled each one. Bank transfer, March 2019, $2,200, rent. Bank transfer, April 2019, $2,200, rent. Voicemail, November 2021, 2:14 a.m., request for $400, groceries. By 5:47 a.m., I had sent Arthur Davis 142 files. I made coffee. I packed Miles's lunch. I braided his hair the way he liked it, tight on the sides. I drove him to school and watched him walk through the front doors with his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. Then I sat in the parking lot for 11 minutes with my hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was sharp. It was clear. I was done pretending this was okay. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday, 45 days after the petition was filed. Courtroom 3. B. Family Division, Kent County Circuit Court. I arrived at 7:48 a.m., 12 minutes before the doors opened. I wore a gray blazer, a white blouse, black flats. No jewelry except my wedding ring, which I still wore on my left hand. Arthur had told me to dress exactly like what I was: a school teacher, a mother, a woman with nothing to hide. Bryce arrived at 8:09 a.m. with our parents trailing behind him like a procession. He was wearing the navy suit again, the one I'd bought. Loretta was in a cream-colored blouse with pearl buttons, her lips pressed into that thin smile she wore when she believed she was winning. Dennis walked 3 steps behind them both, his eyes on the linoleum, his hands in his pockets. Bryce's attorney was a man named Kevin Walsh. Young, eager, the kind of lawyer who takes cases he doesn't fully understand because the retainer check clears. The hearing began at 8:30 a.m. Kevin Walsh stood first. He presented the petition with practiced confidence. He cited my teaching salary, $54,500, as evidence that I was living below the threshold of adequate care for a minor child. He referenced the cost of living in Grand Rapids, the price of health care, the expenses associated with raising an 8-year-old boy. He painted a picture of a struggling single mother clinging to a profession that couldn't support her family. He gestured toward Bryce, who sat with his hands folded and his jaw set, looking like a man who had rehearsed this face in a mirror. The petitioner, Mr. Bryce Archer, is requesting temporary custody not out of malice, but out of genuine concern for the welfare of his nephew, Walsh said, supported by the sworn affidavit of both maternal grandparents, Dennis and Loretta Archer, who have witnessed firsthand the financial strain under which Ms. Archer operates. The judge, a woman named Patricia Caldwell, 61 years old with silver-rimmed glasses and a reputation for not suffering fools, looked at the affidavit. Then she looked at me. Then she looked at Arthur. "Mr. Davis," she said, "your response." Arthur stood slowly. He buttoned his jacket. He placed a single manila folder on the podium. "Your Honor, I'd like to begin with a simple question," he said. "If the petitioner is so concerned about the financial welfare of this child, why was the petitioner financially dependent on the respondent for the past 9 years?" The room went still. Arthur opened the folder. He didn't rush. He placed 9 years of bank statements on the overhead projector, 1 page at a time. Each page was highlighted: yellow for transfers to Bryce, blue for dates, pink for amounts. $12,000 in startup capital for a food truck that operated for 11 weeks, Arthur said. $4,250 in vehicle repairs, $39,600 in rent payments for an apartment the petitioner could not afford on his own, $7,600 in credit card bailouts, utility payments, and phone bills, totaling $63,450 in one-directional financial support from the respondent to the petitioner. Over 9 years, not a single dollar returned. I didn't look at Bryce. I didn't need to. I could hear the leather of his chair creak as he shifted. Arthur reached into his briefcase and removed a small digital recorder. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to enter into evidence 14 voicemails left on my client's phone by the petitioner over the past 4 years. Judge Caldwell nodded. Arthur pressed play. The first voicemail was from November 14th, 2 years ago. Bryce's voice filled the courtroom, thin, cracked, desperate. "Colleen, please, I'm going to be evicted. I need $2,200 by Friday. You're the only one with real money. Please, I'm begging you." The second was from March. "Colleen, my card got declined at the grocery store. I need $400. I know you have it. Please, just send it." The third, the fourth, the seventh. Each one more desperate than the last. Each one confirming, in Bryce's own voice, that I was his lifeline. That he knew I had money. That he depended on me entirely. The 12th voicemail was the one that broke the room open. Bryce, sobbing, barely coherent. "I don't know what I'm going to do. You're the only person in this family who actually has anything. Mom and Dad can't help. They don't have it. You do. Please, Colleen. Please." I sat with my hands folded in my lap. My breathing was even. I watched Judge Caldwell's face change as each voicemail played. It didn't soften. It hardened, like concrete setting in real time. Arthur stopped the recording. He placed one final document on the projector. A letter on official school letterhead signed by Sarah Thompson, principal, Miles's elementary school. "Miles Archer is a straight-A student," Arthur read. "He is consistently engaged, well-nourished, appropriately dressed, and emotionally supported. His home life, as observed through regular parent-teacher conferences and school wellness checks, is stable, nurturing, and age-appropriate. Ms. Archer is one of the most involved and attentive parents in our school community. Arthur let the silence hold. Then he turned to the judge. Your Honor, this petition is not about the welfare of a child. It is about the petitioner's anger at being told no for the first time in his adult life. The respondent refused to co-sign a $25,000 business loan. Within 3 weeks, this petition was filed. That is not concern. That is retaliation. He paused. We are requesting a finding of abuse of process and full restitution of my client's legal expenses, totaling $18,200. Judge Caldwell removed her glasses. She set them on the bench. She looked at Bryce for a long time, then at Kevin Walsh, whose face had gone the color of old milk. This court finds the petitioner's claims not only meritless, but a malicious abuse of the legal system intended to extort a co-signature from a family member. She said, the petition is dismissed with prejudice. The court is referring this filing for review under abuse of process statutes. Additionally, the petitioner is ordered to pay the respondent's legal fees in the amount of $18,200. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel came down once, a single clean sound. Bryce's knees buckled. Not metaphorically, his legs gave out and he caught himself on the edge of the table, knuckles white, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Kevin Walsh reached for his arm. Bryce shook him off. Loretta, sitting in the gallery behind him, let out a sound I'd never heard her make before. Not a gasp, not a cry. Something lower, something animal. Dennis sat motionless. His eyes were fixed on his hands. He didn't look up. I stood. I gathered my bag. I placed my hand on Arthur's arm briefly and said, "Thank you." 2 words, nothing more. I walked out of the courtroom. My shoes were quiet on the tile. The hallway was long and fluorescent and mostly empty. I heard them before I saw them. Footsteps, fast. Loretta's heels clicking against the floor in an uneven rhythm like she'd started running before her body was ready. Colleen. I kept walking. Colleen Marie Archer, you stop right now. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I adjusted my bag on my shoulder and kept my eyes forward. Loretta caught up to me near the elevator bank. She grabbed my arm, not gently. Her fingers dug into the fabric of my blazer just above the elbow, the way you'd grab a child you were dragging out of a store. I stopped. I looked down at her hand. Then I looked at her face. I removed her hand from my arm the way you'd brush lint off a sleeve. Slowly, deliberately, without urgency. Don't touch me, I said. My voice was even. You just destroyed your brother, Loretta said. Her voice was shaking. In front of a judge, in front of strangers, you humiliated him. He filed a custody petition against me, Mom. He tried to take my son. He was trying to help. We were all trying to help. You're struggling, Colleen. We can see it. A teacher's salary is not enough to raise that boy alone. I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, nothing. My house is paid off, I said. Miles has straight A's. His principal wrote the court a letter confirming he's thriving. Bryce hasn't held a job in 3 years, and you co-signed an affidavit calling me unfit. I paused. Which part of that sounds like I'm the one struggling? Loretta's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was hard. Behind her, Bryce was leaning against the wall near the courtroom door, his head down, his hand pressed over his eyes. Dennis stood beside him, still looking at the floor. You'll regret this, Loretta said quietly. Family doesn't do this to each other. I looked at her one last time. I studied the face I'd known for 34 years, the face that had laughed when Bryce called my career a joke, the face that had smiled while signing a document designed to take my child. You're right, I said. Family doesn't. I turned and pressed the elevator button. The doors opened immediately. I stepped inside. I pressed the button for the ground floor. The last thing I saw before the doors closed was Loretta standing in the hallway with her hand still half raised, Bryce slumped against the wall behind her, and Dennis staring at a spot on the floor 2 feet in front of his shoes. The door slid shut with a soft mechanical hum. I drove home in silence. No radio, no phone calls. I pulled into the driveway at 9:23 a.m. I sat in the car for 4 minutes looking at the house. The azalea bush Miles and I had planted last spring was blooming near the front steps. Then I went inside. I set my bag on the counter. I opened my phone. I went through my contacts one by one, and I blocked every number that belonged to them. Bryce, Loretta, Dennis. I removed myself from the family group chat. I deleted the thread without reading the messages that had already started piling up. I went into my email and created a filter. Any message from an Archer family address went straight to a folder I labeled Arthur Davis, if needed. I never opened it. I changed the code on the front gate. I sat down at the kitchen table. The same chair, the same spot where I'd read the petition 6 weeks ago. The coffee maker gurgled in the corner. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a lawnmower 2 streets over. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel revenge. I felt something simpler and heavier than either of those things. I felt peace, real peace, like the first deep breath after years of holding one in. The cut was clean. That afternoon, I picked Miles up from school at 3:15. He climbed into the back seat, buckled himself in, and looked at me through the rearview mirror. "How was your day?" I asked. Same question I asked every day, same voice. "Good," he said. Then, after a pause, quieter. "Mom, did something happen today?" I looked at him in the mirror. His backpack was on his lap. His hands were folded on top of it. 8 years old and already reading rooms the way some adults never learn to. "Something did happen," I said, "but it was a good thing. Nobody is going to bother us anymore." He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once, slowly, like he was processing something he'd been carrying for a long time and was finally setting it down. "Okay," he said. We drove home. I made spaghetti. He did his homework at the kitchen table while I graded papers next to him. We didn't talk about the hearing. We didn't talk about Bryce or Loretta or Dennis. We just sat there, the two of us, in the quiet of a house that finally felt like it belonged only to us. That was the last day I spent a single second thinking about what they needed from me. The first week was silent. No calls came through because there were no numbers left to call from. No texts. No emails that made it past the filter. I checked the folder once, on Arthur's advice, and saw 11 messages from Loretta, each one longer and more frantic than the last. The first was 2 sentences. The 11th was 4 paragraphs. I didn't read any of them. I closed the folder and went back to grading vocabulary quizzes. Arthur told me Bryce's attorney had filed a motion to reduce the $18,200 legal fee judgment. The motion was denied. Judge Caldwell didn't even schedule a hearing. The order stood. Full payment within 90 days. Bryce didn't have $18,200. Bryce didn't have $1,800. Bryce had been living off the $2,200 a month I'd been sending him for rent, and that pipeline had been dry for 3 months before the hearing even happened. The first domino fell 30 days after the judgment. Bryce was evicted from the luxury apartment downtown, the one with the exposed brick and the rooftop pool and the gym in the basement. The property management company filed the notice 11 days after his last rent payment bounced. He had 14 days to vacate. Arthur told me Bryce's name appeared in the Kent County eviction filings, which were public record. I didn't look them up. I didn't need to. He moved into his parents' basement. Loretta and Dennis Archer lived in a 3-bedroom ranch house in Wyoming, Michigan, a suburb just south of Grand Rapids. The house was 28 years old. The mortgage was almost paid off, but almost isn't the same as done. And the $489 monthly payment that had once been manageable became a different kind of weight when their 27-year-old son showed up at the front door with 2 suitcases and a storage unit bill he couldn't cover. The storage unit went into default after 60 days. Everything in it, the food, truck equipment he'd never fully sold, boxes of lifestyle coaching branded merchandise he'd ordered in bulk, a leather couch that didn't fit in the basement, was auctioned off. Total recovery, $340. It didn't touch what he owed. The $18,200 judgment went to collections at the 90-day mark, exactly on schedule. Bryce's credit score, which had never been strong, dropped to 461. Arthur told me this during one of our quarterly check-ins. I didn't ask for the information. He provided it as part of the case file closure. I noted it the way I'd note a student's test score. Factual, complete, filed. 3 months after the hearing, Dennis and Loretta canceled their 40th anniversary cruise. They'd been planning it for 2 years, a 7-day trip through the Caribbean, $4,800 for the cabin alone, plus excursions, plus flights to Miami. Loretta had mentioned it at every family dinner for 18 months. It was the one thing she talked about that wasn't about Bryce. They canceled it because Bryce needed $1,100 for a parking ticket he'd let escalate into a bench warrant, and another $750 for car insurance he'd let lapse. The money had to come from somewhere. The cruise fund was the only somewhere left. I learned this through Sarah Thompson, of all people. Sarah's sister attended the same church as Loretta, and Loretta had apparently told half the congregation that she was sacrificing for family during a difficult season. She didn't mention which family member had created the difficult season. She didn't mention the custody petition. She didn't mention the $63,450. 6 months after the hearing, Bryce took a job stocking shelves at a home improvement store off 28th Street. Night shift, $14.75 an hour. He started at 10 p.m. and clocked out at 6:30 in the morning. I knew because a colleague of mine, a 5th grade teacher named Janet Harris, saw him there one Saturday while buying mulch. She told me in the break room on Monday, her voice careful, the way people speak when they're not sure if information is welcome or a wound. "I saw your brother," she said, "at the hardware store. He was stacking bags of concrete mix on a pallet. He looked thin." I nodded. "Okay," I said, and I went back to my lesson plans. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel pity. I felt the clean, neutral space that exists when a problem you didn't create stops being your responsibility. Dennis had started driving for a rideshare service on weekends to cover the gap in their household budget. He was 62 years old, driving strangers around Grand Rapids on Friday and Saturday nights in a 12-year-old sedan with 140,000 miles on it. I heard this from the same church pipeline that seemed to carry every piece of Archer family news whether I wanted it or not. Loretta stopped going to her book club. She stopped going to the church potluck. She stopped answering calls from her sister, my Aunt Beverly, who had called me once 2 weeks after the hearing, to say she was proud of me. I didn't ask for that call either, but I didn't block it. The family dinners stopped entirely. There was no formal announcement, no dramatic final gathering. They just ended. The table that had seated 6 every other Sunday, the table where Bryce had once called my career a joke while wearing shoes I'd indirectly paid for, just stopped being set. 8 months after the hearing, Bryce's lifestyle coaching website went dark. The domain expired. Nobody renewed it. The Instagram account that had once posted photos of bottle service and rooftop sunsets went private, then inactive, then disappeared. I didn't check. Janet Harris's daughter showed me when I wasn't looking for it, pulling up the cached page on her phone during a staff meeting. The last post was from 5 months earlier, a photo of a sunset with the caption, "New chapter loading." It had 4 likes. The friends Bryce had collected during his luxury apartment era dissolved like sugar in water. They weren't friends. They were an audience. And audiences leave when the show closes. I heard through Arthur's final case summary that Loretta had called his office twice, trying to negotiate a reduction of the $18,200 judgment on Bryce's behalf. Arthur declined both calls after confirming the nature of the request. He sent a 1-paragraph letter stating that the judgment was a court order, not a negotiation, and that further contact regarding reduction should be directed to the court. She didn't call a third time. 1 year after the hearing, on a Saturday in late September, Miles and I drove 40 minutes north to a trail system outside Grand Rapids. The air was cool, the leaves just starting to turn, and the trail wound through birch trees with bark so white they looked like they were glowing. Miles ran ahead of me on the path, his sneakers kicking up small clouds of dust, his laughter bouncing off the trees. Beside him, moving in that clumsy, joyful way that only a 7-month-old golden retriever can manage, was Cooper. We'd adopted him from a rescue in April. Miles had named him on the drive home, sitting in the back seat with the puppy in his lap, grinning so wide I could see it in the rearview mirror. "Cooper," he said, "because he looks like he's made of copper pennies." Cooper didn't fetch well yet. Miles threw the ball and Cooper chased it, overran it, circled back, picked it up, then trotted off in the wrong direction entirely. Miles laughed so hard he bent at the waist. The sound carried through the trees, like something I'd been waiting years to hear. His grades were back up, straight A's, same as before. His teacher had written in his fall progress report that Miles was a leader in the classroom, empathetic toward his peers, and consistently curious. He joined the school's science club. He was building a model volcano for the fall showcase. The baking soda and vinegar were already in the garage, waiting. He hadn't wet the bed since 2 weeks after the hearing. We sat on a flat rock near a creek bed and ate turkey sandwiches I'd packed that morning. Cooper lay between us, panting, his tail thumping against the stone. The sun came through the canopy in broken columns of light. The creek made a sound like a conversation you couldn't quite hear. "Mom," Miles said, his mouth half full of sandwich. I'm glad it's just us." I looked at him. His brown eyes were steady. His hair was windblown and sticking up on one side. There was mustard on his chin. Me too, I said. He leaned against my shoulder. Cooper shifted closer. The three of us sat there while the creek talked to itself, and the leaves turned gold above our heads. I didn't lose a brother. I simply stopped paying for a stranger's mistakes. Some doors close so better ones can open. And the door that opened for Miles and me led to a life that was quieter, smaller, and more honest than anything I'd known before. I never regretted a single second of it. If you enjoyed this story about protecting your children and knowing your worth, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.